The ii7-V-I formula encountered so far could be described as the classic version, and is the most common form of this cadence. Here's a reminder of how it sounds in G major. This demonstration will focus on ways of varying the ii7-V-I formula. This is useful if you have previously used ii7-V-I, or if the last given chord will not allow you to use the classic version in which the dissonance is managed in the alto part. These variants can be placed into three categories. Number 1, dissonance in the tenor. Number 2, a chromatically altered ii7-V. And number 3, the melodic decoration of ii7-V. All of them are used when the melody drops from 2 to 1, or from supertonic to tonic, leading to the pause note. Let's have a look at how to manage the dissonance in the tenor in major and minor keys. Here's an extract from Riemenschneider number 9, in which this is managed in a particularly decorative way. In the following demonstration, we'll build this cadence step by step. Examples in G major and E minor will be used in parallel. You'll find it useful to write out the stimulus and copy the steps from the screen as and when they occur. You should then transpose the stimulus into every key so that you can practice for every eventuality. You may remember that if you are able to choose, it is preferable to manage the dissonance in the alto part. The dissonance and its resolution are far more effective when they occur between two high parts that are close together. However, sometimes you have no choice in the matter. In these examples, the last chord given is the chord preceding the approach chord. By definition, it will contain the note of preparation for the following dissonance. The note of dissonance in ii7-V is its seventh. In fact, it is easy to identify the note of dissonance in this chord. It is always the tonic. So in the first example this will be G, and in the second, E. Going back to the cadences, in both cases it is now obvious that the tenor is carrying the note of preparation in the last chord given. This means that the following dissonance and its resolution should all take place in the tenor part. Having established the key of both of the examples, the first in G major, the second in E minor, and in order to build a good way of working, Arabic numerals are placed above the melody in the soprano part, identifying their position in the scale. Next, the chords are chosen and labelled using Roman numerals underneath the bass stave. It is always a good idea to include the last chord given in order to promote continuity. Here the last chord given is chord 1. Underneath the supertonic minim will be the approach chord, ii7-V, followed by 5 in root position. This will be followed by 1 in root position for the pause chord, in both cases. The bass line is added following the Roman numerals, and check for consecutives against the soprano. If any are found, they will need to be corrected before moving on. The note of dissonance is sounded. It is then resolved by dropping a semitone to the third of chord 5, which is also the leading note. In a minor key, the appropriate accidental must be used. However, in the next chord, It does not rise to the tonic, nor drop to the fifth of the tonic chord, which would take it too low. It leaps to the third of the tonic chord. Having checked for consecutives once more, the alto is now added. The aim here is to keep the chords full and to move from note to note with the smallest possible interval. The missing note from 2/7-B is identified. In the major version, this will be E. In the minor, it will be C natural. And it's important here to cancel the accidental from the first beat of the bar, the C sharp. The following chord 5 is already complete, and so the root is doubled with a D in the G major version and a B in the E minor version. The alto stays on this note for the pause chord, as this is the missing note from chord 1. Note that it is not possible to create a passing seventh over chord 5. If a lower auxiliary note were to be created in the alto part, forming the seventh of chord 5, there could be no downwards resolution of this note, and so it is best not to use it. Apart from this feature, and the treatment of the leading note leaping up to the third of the tonic chord, this cadence is identical to the classic version involving management of the dissonance in the alto. Here the two versions are compared. The one on the left is the classic version, with dissonance in the alto, the one to the right, dissonance in the tenor. The only differences between them, really, are that the alto and tenor parts are swapped over, and in the case of the alto part, displaced by an octave. Going back to the cadences that we have constructed, which are now complete, let's hear how they sound. First, the example in G major. Now the example in E minor. And just as a reminder, if this was the very last cadence in a chorale in a minor key, it would be necessary to add the tiersta picardy to the final pause chord. Now let's have a look at how to use the chromatically altered version of 2/7-B. Here's a reminder of how the classic versions appear when the dissonance is managed in the alto part. G major to the left and E minor to the right. By raising the bass note of 2/7-B by one semitone, using the appropriate accidental, 2/7-B becomes an applied dominant, or secondary dominant. In other words, it becomes the dominant of the chord that follows. This is also known as 5 of 5, or the dominant of the dominant, intensifying the effect of that progression. This is very easy to do in a major key. Just add the accidental to the bass note, and then cancel it one beat later in the tenor part, so that chord 5 still has its passing seventh. In a minor key, you have to take more care of the accidentals. Raising the bass note of 2/7-B by a semitone creates diminished intervals within the chord, which is further unwanted dissonance, and so the fifth has to be raised as well. Since this involves raising the C natural to a C sharp, all that will be required is the removal of the natural sign. A cautionary accidental is added to the tenor part in the final beat to create the passing seventh. As a further refinement, you should look at the bass note preceding 2/7-B. In these examples, an ascending augmented fourth is created by the chromatic alteration of 2/7-B, which is an awkward leap. It is always best to resolve wide and awkward leaps in the opposite direction to the leap. In these examples it's not the case at present, but by raising the bass an octave, a much better melodic effect is created. So let's hear how this sounds, first in G major. And now in E minor. Finally, it is possible to add a little melodic decoration to this cadence. In these examples, some semiquavers have been added to the note of dissonance in 2/7-B. In the version to the left in G major, this is entirely successful and very easy to replicate. In the version to the right in E minor, close scrutiny will reveal that some of the accidentals have not yet been added. This D in the alto part, for example, clearly needs to be raised to D sharp in order to create the cadential effect. But once this is raised to D sharp, the following note, the C, also needs to be raised by a semitone in order to keep the figure conjunct. Although D sharp to C looks like a conjunct motion, it sounds disjunct as it's an interval of a minor third. Once this has been achieved, there's clearly two different versions of the same note being sung. In the alto, C sharp, and in the same beat, a tenor singing C natural. This effect is known as false relations and is not allowed, and so the tenor's note must be raised by a semitone by removing the natural sign. This will now reveal that the bass note itself needs to be raised, and a cautionary accidental added in the tenor part to create the passing seventh for chord 5. The bass note preceding 2/7-B would also need to be raised in order to create the downward interval of a diminished fifth. And now the cadence is complete, which leads us to the conclusion that this form of melodic decoration should only be used with a chromatically altered form of 2/7-B in a minor key. It's very easy to achieve in a major key, but not so easy to achieve in a minor key unless you really keep your wits about you as far as accidentals are concerned. If you do decide to do something similar, just observe the following points. Do not do anything on the note of resolution, which is the leading note. It is important that this is left untouched and that the gap is preserved between it and its following note. Remember, this is a signature of Bach's style and shouldn't be tampered with. Never use more than 2 semiquavers. Semiquaver movement is rare in the chorales. A run of 4 semiquavers should not be used at all, and it should be restricted to quaver plus 2 semiquavers or 2 semiquavers plus quaver.